The Victorian mansion stood like a sentinel against the gathering dusk, its weathered brick facade holding countless memories of happier times. I traced my fingers along the intricately carved banister as I climbed the stairs, each step echoing through the empty hallway. Nick would be home late again, another night of crucial client meetings that seemed to multiply like shadows in recent months. I paused at our bedroom door, my hand hovering over the crystal doorknob. The house had been my sanctuary since childhood, passed down through generations of strong-willed women in my family. My grandmother's last words still echoed in my mind, "Laura, protect this house. It's more than just walls and windows, it's our legacy." If only she could see how that legacy was slowly crumbling, not from age or neglect, but from something far more insidious. The changes in Nick had been subtle at first, like drops of water slowly eroding stone. The late-night phone calls he'd take in whispered tones on the back porch. The mysterious business trips that seemed to materialize out of thin air. The way his eyes would drift past me during dinner, focused on something, or someone, I couldn't see. "Just busy at work, honey," he'd say, his practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes. "The market's tough right now. We all have to put in extra hours." But there was something hollow in his voice, a falseness that made my skin prickle with unease. I moved to the window, watching the last remnants of sunlight paint the manicured garden in shades of amber and gold. The rose bushes I'd planted when we first married 5 years ago were in full bloom, their heavy heads nodding in the evening breeze. Nick had helped me plant them, back when his laughter was genuine and his touches lingered with warmth instead of obligation. My phone buzzed, startling me from my reverie. A text from Nick, "Working late again. Don't wait up." The words blurred as I blinked back tears of frustration. I'd been the perfect wife, supportive, understanding, patient. But lately, that patience felt less like a virtue and more like a weakness being exploited. The house creaked and settled around me, its familiar sounds offering little comfort. I moved to our shared walk-in closet, running my hands along Nick's expensive suits. The fabric felt cold beneath my fingers, each garment a silent witness to whatever secrets he was keeping. A receipt fluttered from one pocket, dinner for 2 at LeBlanc, dated 3 days ago. My stomach clenched. He'd told me he'd worked through dinner that night. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the receipt clutched in my trembling hands. The amount made me gasp, over $300. Nick had been complaining about our finances for months, insisting we cut back on household expenses. Yet here was evidence of lavish dinners I knew nothing about. The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted me from my thoughts. I moved to the window, expecting to see Nick's familiar silhouette. Instead, I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nick was helping a woman out of his car, tall, elegant, her long dark hair catching the streetlight. She laughed at something he said, her hand lingering on his arm far too long to be professional. They disappeared from view, but I couldn't move from my spot by the window. The world seemed to tilt and spin around me as pieces started falling into place, the late nights, the secret phone calls, the emotional distance that had been growing between us like an invisible wall. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind again, "Protect this house." But how could I protect our home when the threat wasn't coming from outside, but from the very person I'd trusted with everything, my heart, my future, my family's legacy? The front door opened and closed downstairs. Nick's footsteps on the stairs, slower and heavier than usual. I remained frozen by the window, my reflection in the glass showing a woman I barely recognized, pale, wide-eyed, trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. "Laura." Nick's voice carried up the stairs, casual and relaxed, as if he hadn't just shattered our world into 1,000 glittering pieces. "You still up?" I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a mask of normalcy. The receipt in my hand crackled as I slipped it into my pocket. Nick might think he was being clever, might believe he had the upper hand, but he had no idea who he was really dealing with. My grandmother hadn't raised a fool, she'd raised a warrior. And warriors know that sometimes the best strategy is to watch, wait, and gather intelligence before striking. I turned from the window, ready to face my husband with a smile that hid daggers. The game was just beginning, and Nick was about to learn that betrayal is a dangerous game to play in a house built on the strength of generations of determined women. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting accusatory shadows across our bedroom floor. I lay awake, watching Nick's peaceful slumber with a newfound clarity that felt like shards of glass in my chest. How easily he slept, this man who wore betrayal like an expensive cologne, subtle yet unmistakable. I slipped from our bed, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floors my great-grandfather had laid by hand. The house seemed to whisper around me, its familiar creaks and groans now carrying warnings instead of comfort. In the kitchen, I methodically prepared coffee, each movement precise and controlled, like a surgeon preparing for an operation that would excise a cancer from her life. Nick appeared just as the coffee finished brewing, his crisp suit and practiced smile a masterclass in deception. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, brushing a kiss against my cheek that felt like acid on my skin. I handed him his coffee, noting how his wedding ring caught the light, a golden promise turned to brass. "That client meeting ran late last night," he offered unprompted, stirring artificial sweetener into his cup. "The Morrison account is proving more complicated than expected." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, and I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed it in his car after saying goodnight to his dark-haired companion. "The Morrison account," I echoed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. "Funny, I didn't realize Morrison had switched to LeBlanc for their business dinners." I watched his face carefully, cataloging every microscopic flinch, every flicker of panic that ghosted across his features before being swallowed by his usual confident mask. LeBlanc. His confusion seemed genuine enough to fool anyone who hadn't spent 5 years memorizing every nuance of his expressions. "I haven't been there in months." I smiled, a sharp thing that felt more like baring teeth than expressing joy. "My mistake then. Must have been thinking of something else." The receipt in my robe pocket felt like it was burning against my thigh, but I held my peace. Let him think he still held all the cards. Let him believe his house of lies was still standing strong. As he left for work, I waited exactly 17 minutes before calling my oldest friend, Rachel. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for this call. "Laura? What's wrong? I can hear it in your voice." "The dam broke." Words poured out of me like a flash flood, drowning the kitchen in ugly truths and terrible suspicions. I told her everything, the late nights, the mystery woman, the receipt, the way Nick's touch had turned from tender to perfunctory, like checking off another item on his daily to-do list. "That bastard," Rachel breathed when I finally ran out of words. "Laura, honey, you need more than just suspicions. You need proof. I know someone, he's discreet, professional. A private investigator who specializes in cases like yours." "A private investigator?" The words tasted foreign on my tongue, like exotic fruit I wasn't sure I should trust. "Isn't that a bit extreme?" Rachel's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Extreme is watching the man you love destroy your life while you do nothing. Extreme is letting him think he's smarter than you. This is just good business sense." She was right, of course. Rachel had survived her own divorce 3 years ago, emerging from the ashes like a phoenix reborn. She knew the battlefield I was about to enter, understood the weapons I would need. I took down the investigator's number, each digit another nail in the coffin of my marriage. As I hung up, movement caught my eye through the kitchen window. A sleek red Mercedes was idling at the corner, its driver hidden behind tinted windows. My breath caught. It was the same car I'd seen Nick admiring at a dealership last month, when he'd claimed we couldn't afford basic repairs on my grandmother's antique chandelier. The Mercedes pulled away, but not before I glimpsed a flash of long dark hair. My hands began to shake, not with fear or grief, but with a rage so pure it felt like transformation. I grabbed my phone again, fingers steady as I dialed the investigator's number. A professional voice answered, "Hawthorne Investigations, how may I help you?" I drew a deep breath, tasting destiny on my tongue. "My name is Laura Chen. I need information about my husband, and the woman he's been seeing behind my back." "Of course, Mrs. Chen. Would you prefer to discuss this in person? Some conversations shouldn't leave digital footprints." Smart. Careful. Exactly what I needed. "Yes," I replied, watching Nick's coffee cup in the sink, lipstick on its rim that wasn't mine. "When can we meet?" "I have an opening this afternoon at 2. Bring any evidence you've already collected, no matter how insignificant it might seem. In cases like these, Mrs. Chen, it's often the smallest details that tell the biggest stories." As I hung up, a glint of metal caught my eye. There, partially hidden behind the coffee maker, lay a small golden earring I'd never seen before. I picked it up, its unfamiliar weight in my palm like a key unlocking a door I never wanted to open. But some doors, once revealed, demand to be walked through, no matter what monsters wait on the other side. The private investigator's office felt like a confessional booth, dark wood paneling absorbing my whispered suspicions like a priest receiving sins. James Hawthorne sat across from me, his weathered face a map of other people's secrets, his eyes holding the weight of 1,000 shattered marriages. "Tell me everything," he said, laying out a leather-bound notebook with methodical precision. "Every detail you've noticed, every inconsistency, every moment that made your instinct scream." His voice carried the gravelly assurance of someone who had navigated these treacherous waters before. I placed the golden earring on his desk, watching it catch the afternoon light like a tear frozen in amber. "I found this morning. It's not mine." My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else, someone stronger, someone who wasn't being hollowed out from the inside by betrayal. Hawthorne picked up the earring, examining it under a desk lamp. "Cartier," he noted, his tone neutral but knowing. "Recent collection. Not the kind of thing one misplaces accidentally." He set it down carefully, the soft clink against his desk like a judge's gavel sealing a verdict. I spent the next hour constructing a timeline of suspicion, each late night, each suspicious phone call, each moment when Nick's touch had felt more like obligation than desire. Hawthorne took notes in precise shorthand, occasionally asking questions that carved straight to the marrow of my fears. "The woman in the Mercedes," he said, tapping his pen against the notebook. "You've seen her twice now. Could you describe her again?" I closed my eyes, summoning the image that had burned itself into my retinas. Tall, elegant. Dark hair past her shoulders. The kind of woman who makes heads turn without trying. She moves like she owns whatever space she's in. My throat constricted around the words, each one a fresh acknowledgement of my husband's perfidy. "And you said Nick's been pushing to refinance the house?" Hawthorne's question seemed to come from left field, but something in his tone made my spine straighten. "Yes. 4 months now. Claims we need the capital for his business ventures." The words tasted bitter on my tongue. "I've refused. The house belongs to my family. It's not just property, it's heritage, history, home." Hawthorne's expression shifted subtly, like shadow passing over stone. "Mrs. Chen, I'm going to need you to sign some additional paperwork. What I'm about to investigate may go beyond simple infidelity." The implications of his words settled over me like frost. "You think there's more?" In my experience, when a spouse suddenly pushes for financial restructuring while engaging in suspicious behavior. He let the sentence hang, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I signed the papers with hands that refused to tremble, each signature another step down a path I never thought I'd walk. Hawthorne promised first results within days, his efficiency both comforting and terrifying. Leaving his office, I found myself in the building's marble lobby, surrounded by my own reflections in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, harder, colder, her eyes holding shadows I didn't recognize. I watched as she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, transformed vulnerability into armor. My phone buzzed, Nick, asking about dinner plans. I texted back with practiced normalcy, my fingers moving on autopilot while my mind raced ahead, calculating angles, considering possibilities. The game had changed. This wasn't just about a wandering husband anymore, this was about protecting what was mine. Rachel was waiting at our usual cafe, her face tight with concern. How did it go? I stirred my untouched coffee, watching the cream create endless spirals. Hawthorne thinks there's more going on than just an affair. Something about the house, about Nick's sudden interest in refinancing. The house? Rachel's eyes narrowed. Laura, remember what happened with Marcus and his second wife? The property scheme? The memory clicked into place like a key in a lock. Marcus, Rachel's ex-colleague, had nearly lost his family estate to a sophisticated fraud involving his new wife and a web of fake business loans. The parallels made my blood run cold. I need you to do something for me, I said, pulling out a small notebook. I need you to introduce me to your friend in the county records office. The one who helped you during your divorce. Rachel's expression shifted from concern to fierce approval. Now you're thinking like a survivor instead of a victim. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the keys. I'll set it up for tomorrow. But Laura. She reached across the table, gripping my hand. Be careful. The most dangerous moment is when they realize you're not as blind as they thought. I squeezed her hand back, feeling the strength of shared experience flow between us. As I drove home, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, a warrior's sunset. The house loomed ahead, its familiar silhouette now a battlefield waiting to be claimed. Nick's car was already in the driveway, unusual for this hour. Through the front window, I could see him pacing in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with sharp, angry movements. I parked but didn't get out, watching him like a naturalist observing a dangerous specimen. His face was flushed, his free hand raking through his perfectly styled hair, signs of stress I'd never seen during his supposedly crucial client calls. As I watched, he ended his call and immediately made another, his posture changing completely, smooth, charming, the mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. I recognized the transformation with a clarity that felt like waking from a long dream. How had I never seen it before? The man I married was just another facade in Nick's collection, a role he played to get what he wanted. The question was, what exactly did he want? And more importantly, what would it cost me if I didn't stop him? The county records office breathed dust and secrets, its fluorescent lights casting a sickly pallor over endless rows of filing cabinets. Rachel's contact, Marion, had the sharp eyes of an archivist and the discreet demeanor of a professional secret keeper. She laid out the documents before me like a fortune teller spreading tarot cards, each page another glimpse into my future, or rather, the future Nick had been orchestrating behind my back. These were filed 3 weeks ago, Marion said, her finger tracing along lines of legal jargon that made my vision blur. The refinancing paperwork, property assessments, loan applications. She paused, her expression carefully neutral. And this, power of attorney documentation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Power of attorney. Nick had tried to obtain power of attorney over my property without my knowledge. The room tilted sideways, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, too harsh, like interrogation lamps exposing every naive assumption I'd ever made about my marriage. The signatures, Marion continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They're excellent forgeries. Professional work. Someone who knows what they're doing. She pulled out another document, this one bearing what looked like my signature on a loan agreement. But they made a mistake here, used a middle initial you don't have. That's what flagged it in our system. I stared at the fake signature, seeing in those flowing lines the death of every tender moment, every whispered promise, every shared dream that had filled our 5 years together. The forgery was beautiful in its way, like a poisonous flower, deadly but compelling. My phone vibrated, another text from Hawthorne. Meeting arranged. Target and associate spotted at Meridian Bank. Photos incoming. Seconds later, images appeared on my screen, Nick and his dark-haired companion entering the bank's revolving doors, their body language speaking volumes. Professional on the surface, but there was an intimacy in their movements that felt like acid in my veins. Her name is Diana Reeves, Hawthorne's next message read. Banking executive specializing in property finance. Recently divorced. No children. Connected to 3 similar cases in the past 2 years, wealthy clients, sudden refinancing, mysterious property transfers. Nothing ever proven. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Nick hadn't chosen me for love, he'd chosen me for my inheritance, for the house that represented generations of my family's history. Diana wasn't just his lover, she was his partner in an elaborate scheme to strip me of everything I held dear. Marian was still talking, pointing out other discrepancies, other red flags, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. In my mind, I was back in our bedroom, watching Nick sleep with that peaceful expression that I now recognized as the serenity of a predator confident in its hunt. There's more, Marian said, pulling out another file. The refinancing application includes plans for development. They're planning to demolish the house, Laura. The land value alone. She trailed off, perhaps seeing something in my expression that gave her pause. The development plans were detailed, professional, architectural drawings showing luxury condominiums rising from the ashes of my family home. The date on the plans was from 6 months ago, before Nick had even started his campaign to convince me about refinancing. They'd been planning this, plotting this, while he still kissed me goodnight and called me darling. Rachel's hand appeared on my shoulder, steadying me. Breathe, honey. Just breathe. I realized I was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks in my palms. The pain felt distant, unimportant compared to the crystalline clarity of rage that was filling me like light filling a prism. I need copies, I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Every document, every form, every piece of paper with a forged signature. And I need them authenticated by an expert. Marian nodded, already moving toward the copier. I can recommend someone. Former FBI forensics specialist. She's thorough. Good. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with hands that had stopped trembling. One more thing, I need you to flag these documents in the system. Make it look like a routine audit. Nothing that would raise suspicions, but enough to slow down any attempts to process them further. Rachel was watching me with a mixture of concern and approval. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to arrange a meeting with Diana Reeves, I said, watching Marian methodically copy each damning page. Professional to professional. Woman to woman. A conversation about choices and consequences. My phone buzzed again, Nick, asking what I wanted for dinner, as if this were any normal day, as if he hadn't tried to steal my birthright with forged papers and false smiles. I texted back suggesting his favorite restaurant, adding a touch of warmth to the words that I no longer felt. The game was changing. Nick thought he was the hunter, thought I was just another trusting wife to be deceived and discarded. He had no idea that with every fake signature, every secret meeting, every calculated lie, he'd been fashioning the weapons of his own destruction. As I left the records office, the setting sun painted the city in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere across town, Nick and Diana were probably congratulating themselves on their clever plans, their foolproof scheme. Let them celebrate. Let them think they'd won. I had proof now, proof and purpose and a cold, clear certainty about what needed to be done. The time for tears and doubt was over. Now it was time for justice, served with the same calculated precision they'd used to try to destroy my life. The weight of the copied documents in my briefcase felt like ammunition, each page a bullet in the chamber of a gun I was only now learning to aim. The sun was setting when I finally saw Diana Reeves in the flesh, the dying light painting her expensive suit in shades of blood and gold. LeBlanc's private dining room offered the perfect stage for our encounter, neutral ground where we could play out this elaborate dance of predator and prey. Though perhaps she hadn't yet realized which of us was which. "Mrs. Chen," she purred, extending a manicured hand. "How unexpected. Nick never mentioned you frequented LeBlanc." Her smile was a masterpiece of calculated charm, practiced in boardrooms and bedrooms with equal precision. The diamond earring in her right ear caught the light, a perfect match for the one I'd found in my bedroom. "Nick mentions so little these days," I replied, my voice carrying the same silken danger as a blade being drawn from velvet. "Please, sit. I took the liberty of ordering the Bordeaux you enjoyed here last week. The sommelier was quite helpful in recalling your preferences." A flicker of unease crossed her face, the first crack in her perfect facade. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen it, tasted it, stored it away like a trophy. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake. I haven't been here in months." I placed the receipt on the table between us, aligned perfectly with the edge like a declaration of war. $347. 2 glasses of Chateau Margaux 2015. 1 ribeye, 1 salmon. Tuesday night. I leaned forward, watching her pupils dilate slightly. The same night my husband claimed to be working late on the Morrison account. "Laura, may I call you Laura?" Her voice remained steady, professional, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around her water glass. "I think you may have some misconceptions about my relationship with your husband." "Oh, I don't think I have any misconceptions at all, Diana." I withdrew the folder of documents from my briefcase, spreading them across the white tablecloth like tarot cards spelling doom. Power of attorney documentation. Forged signatures. Development plans dated 6 months ago. You've done this before, haven't you? The recently divorced banking executive and the trusted husband, working together to strip assets from unsuspecting wives. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking garish in the intimate lighting. "These are confidential documents. You have no right dash." "I have every right," I cut her off, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to freeze the air between us. "That house isn't just property to be carved up and sold off. It's my birthright. My legacy. And you and Nick thought you could just forge a few signatures, file a few papers, and erase generations of my family's history?" She reached for the documents, but I was faster, sliding them back into my briefcase. "Copies are already with my lawyer, the district attorney's office, and the banking commission. Did you know forgery and attempted property fraud carry substantial penalties in this state? Especially for licensed banking professionals?" "You're bluffing," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice like rot into expensive wood. "Nick assured me everything was handled. The papers were perfect. Perfect except for one detail: you gave me a middle initial I don't have. A small mistake, really. The kind that's easy to make when you're forging documents about someone you've never met. Someone whose life you were planning to destroy over expensive wine and shared betrayal." The waiter approached with the wine, but I waved him away. Diana sat frozen, her practiced poise crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Want?" I smiled, feeling the weight of generations of strong women in my blood. "I want you to look at these development plans one more time. Look at them carefully. Memorize every detail of what you're never going to have." I stood, gathering my briefcase with deliberate grace. "You have 24 hours to transfer to another branch, preferably in another state. After that, every document I have goes public. Your career, your reputation, your carefully constructed future, all of it ends." "And Nick?" I paused, letting the moment stretch like a garrote wire. "Nick is your problem now. Consider him severance pay for a job poorly done. He'll never forgive you for this," she said, but her eyes held the desperate calculation of someone watching their castle of cards collapse. Forgiveness isn't what I'm after, Diana. Justice is. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I placed the single golden earring on the table. You left something at my house. I assume you'll want the pair complete. A matching set, just like you and Nick, beautiful on the surface, worthless underneath. The walk to my car felt like floating, each step carrying me further from the woman I'd been and closer to the woman I was becoming. My phone buzzed, Nick, asking where I was. I could picture him waiting at home, probably rehearsing his lies, unaware that his carefully constructed scheme was unraveling thread by treacherous thread. The night air carried the scent of jasmine from the restaurant's garden, sweet and intoxicating. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a perfect accompaniment to the storm I was about to unleash. Nick thought he knew everything about me, thought he could predict my every move. He was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is the one you've underestimated all along. The house seemed to hold its breath as I stepped through the front door, every creak and whisper of ancient wood bearing witness to this final act. Nick stood in the living room, backlit by the dying sun streaming through grandmother's stained glass windows. The light painted him in false glory, reds and golds that couldn't disguise the hollow man beneath. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice carrying that familiar note of calculated concern that I now recognized as the prelude to another lie. "I've been worried sick." I moved past him to stand before the fireplace, my fingers trailing along the mantel where generations of my family had rested their hands before me. Each groove and imperfection in the wood held memories, Christmas stockings hung with reverent joy, family photos arranged with pride, the quiet moments when my grandmother would tell me stories of the strong women who had called this house home. "Interesting day," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "I had lunch at LeBlanc. Lovely place. The sommelier there has an exceptional memory for faces. And wine preferences." I turned to watch the impact of my words, savoring the microscopic flinch that betrayed his rising panic. "Diana sends her regards, by the way. Though I doubt she'll be sending much else, given that she's likely packing her office as we speak." The change that came over his face was fascinating, like watching a mask crack in slow motion, revealing the desperate creature beneath. "Laura, whatever you think you know dash." "I know everything, Nick." I withdrew the folder from my briefcase, the same one I'd shown Diana. The forged documents. The development plans. The whole sordid scheme to steal my birthright and turn it into luxury condominiums. Each word fell between us like stones into still water, ripples of truth disturbing the false calm of our marriage. Did you even love me at all? Or was I just another mark, another trusting fool to be stripped of everything and discarded? He took a step toward me, hands raised in supplication, but stopped when I laughed, a sound as sharp as breaking glass. "Don't. Every word you're about to say, every explanation you've rehearsed, save it for your lawyer. Or better yet, save it for Diana. I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to compare notes during the investigation." Investigation? The word seemed to hit him like a physical blow. "Laura, be reasonable. We can talk about this. Come to some arrangement that benefits everyone." Benefits everyone? The rage that had been simmering beneath my skin burst forth like magma finding release. "Like how you and Diana benefited from destroying other families. Other homes? How many times have you two played this game, Nick? How many lives have you carved up and sold off piece by piece?" He moved then, quick as a striking snake, reaching for the folder. But I was ready, stepping back as Rachel emerged from the shadows of the dining room, phone raised and recording. Behind her, James Hawthorne's solid presence filled the doorway, his weathered face grim with professional satisfaction. "Nicholas Chen," Hawthorne's voice carried the weight of official authority. "I believe you'll want to carefully consider your next move. Assault charges would look particularly unfortunate alongside the fraud and forgery evidence." Nick's face went through a remarkable transformation, from desperate husband to cornered predator to something altogether more pathetic. Laura, please. Everything I did for us. For our future. No, I said, and the single word carried the force of every betrayal, every lie, every moment of trust corrupted. You did it for yourself. You always have. But you made one crucial mistake, Nick. You thought the house was my weakness, the thing you could use to control me. You never understood that it's my strength. Every board, every brick, every piece of this home carries the legacy of women who refuse to be victims. I moved to the front door, opening it with deliberate grace. Your things will be packed and sent to you. The police have some questions about those forged documents, and I imagine the banking commission will be quite interested in your partnership with Diana. I suggest you answer them honestly. It might be the first true thing you've done in years. You'll regret this, he snarled, but the threat rang hollow, like everything else about him. No, Nick. The only thing I regret is not seeing you for what you really are sooner. But then again, I smiled, feeling the weight of my grandmother's spirit in my words. Sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we wanted to become who we were always meant to be. He left, not with the dignity he'd cultivated so carefully, but with the shuffling gait of a con man whose game had finally caught up with him. Rachel moved to hug me, but I held up a hand, needing one more moment to stand alone in my victory. The house settled around me, its familiar sounds now a symphony of triumph rather than remembrance. In the fading light, I could almost see the shadows of the women who had come before me, my grandmother, her mother, all the way back to the first woman who had made this house a home. They had all faced their own battles, their own demons, their own moments of terrible choice. I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, reclaiming each space that Nick had tried to steal. In the kitchen, I found his coffee cup from that morning, the last trace of our false life together. I washed it slowly, deliberately, then placed it in a box marked for donation. Some things weren't worth keeping, even as reminders. Later, as Rachel and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the velvet sky, she asked, "What will you do now?" I thought about the letter in my study, an invitation to join a nonprofit that helped women rebuild their lives after financial fraud and abuse. They needed someone who understood both the legal maze and the emotional wasteland of betrayal. Someone who could guide others through the darkness to find their own strength. Now, I said, feeling the future unfold before me like a road leading home, I become the person I needed when all this began. And I make sure no one else has to face that journey alone. The night air carried the scent of blooming jasmine, my grandmother's favorite. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle sway of the porch swing, the solid presence of the house at my back, the infinite possibilities stretching ahead. Nick had tried to steal my legacy, but in doing so, he had only helped me claim it more fully. Some foundations run too deep to be shaken, some strengths can only be discovered through fire, and some homes, like the women who guard them, refuse to be conquered.